Brian Flores was a really huge addition by the Minnesota Vikings. Now, last year, the Minnesota Vikings defense was absolutely terrible, man. Like, these boys got carved up by Daniel Jones in the wild card round, man. Like, I know you Vikings fans probably want to forget this nightmare, but we're right back talking about it again. This defense got carved up by Daniel freaking Jones, dog. Patrick Peterson, one of the greatest cornerbacks of this past decade, was getting shredded by Isaiah Hodgins. I forget about that. I did not forget about that. Isaiah Hodgins was cooking Patrick Peterson. How many of you guys knew who the hell Isaiah Hodgins was before that playoff game? Hell, Patrick Peterson knew who he was because that wasn't the first time he was getting cooked by Isaiah Hodgins. And I mean, Isaiah Hodgins, he's a solid player at least now, but Patrick Peterson, you just don't expect that out of him. And now Patrick Peterson has left Minnesota, and you want to know what's so ironic? Guess who Patrick Peterson plays for now? My favorite team, the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's so crazy. It's so crazy how the power of the universe works. Now he's playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers, man, and Steelers fans are really excited about this. They were talking about man, he had a really good season, JT. He had a lot of interceptions. Who cares? We get mad at Trayvon Diggs for getting cooked, but yet having a lot of interceptions. But yet, we can't keep this same energy with Patrick Peterson, dog. This man was getting cooked by Isaiah Hodgins. So, he's gone. The Minnesota Vikings bring in Brian Flores. He's going to be a huge upgrade from the previous defensive coordinator who they had last season, who was running his own iteration of that Vic Fangio kind of defense. It was really conservative, didn't really blitz a lot, and that thing was getting absolutely dotted up, bro. Danny Dimes was really living up to that nickname in the wild card round of that playoff game, man. And Brian Flores, he was on the Steelers staff last year, and Mike Tomlin absolutely loved this guy, man. Like, if you listen to Mike Tomlin talked about Brian Flores, he held this guy in high regard, man. Like, when Brian Flores first got fired by Miami, Mike Tomlin immediately just hopped on it. He was like, man, we got a really good chance to get a really good football coach, man. You know how Mike Tomlin talked, man. Like, Mike Tomlin really loved Brian Flores, and this dude had a pretty big impact on the Steelers defense, even though he didn't really call the plays. But this guy was kind of doing a lot of things for the Steelers defense. Even though he had the title of defensive assistant, linebacker coach, he really was doing a lot more than that. Mike Tomlin just assigned him a title just to assign him a title when really he was just doing a lot for the Steelers defense. And the linebacker play was all right, but overall, I think the defense played at a pretty high level. There were definitely a lot of players who their play elevated with Brian Flores being on the staff. And with him leaving, going to the Minnesota Vikings, man, like, this is one of the best offseason staff hires in the whole entire NFL. You already know that under Kevin O'Connell, this offense is still going to be really good, even though you have Check Down Charlie and Sir Kirk Cousins. This defense has a lot of players who I think are going to end up fitting in really well in this Brian Flores aggressive style defense. Like, the Dolphins, they hired Vic Fangio, and the Minnesota Vikings, they hired Brian Flores. And it's really interesting because Vic Fangio, the kind of defense that he ran kind of gets used by the majority of teams in today's NFL, but everybody has their own version of it. And the defensive coordinator who the Vikings had last year, I guess he was running one of the worst versions of it because it didn't stop anybody. You getting cooked by Daniel Jones. So you bring in Brian Flores, and his defense philosophy is completely different. It's like a complete 360, a complete 180, because you go from a super conservative defensive coordinator to one of the most aggressive defensive minds in the whole entire NFL. Like, do you remember when Brian Flores was the head coach of the Miami Dolphins and they were playing Lamar Jackson that game and they blitzed this dude literally the whole entire game? Go back and watch that Brett Coleman breakdown when I think the title of the video is Miami ran the same blitz like 33 or 35 times against the Ravens. Like, the Ravens had no answer for that. So if you're a Vikings fan, you should be feeling really happy about the addition of Brian Flores. And I was listening to this guy in his interviews. Like, this dude sounds really grateful for the opportunity to be the DC up there in Minnesota. And this is a really good opportunity for him to prove himself and to end up getting another shot at being a head coach, because this guy is a fantastic football coach. Not too often do you see too many head coaches get fired after having back-to-back winning seasons, two of the best seasons that the Miami Dolphins have had in recent memory. And their defenses under Brian Flores were absolutely phenomenal. They were aggressive. They were really good at stopping the run. They were able to get after the quarterback. They were disciplined. They were well coached. They were fundamentally sound. I was listening to one of Brian Flores' press conferences and another interview that he did, and he put a lot of emphasis on cornerbacks being able to get off blocks. You don't really hear that all too often. A head coach or a defensive coordinator talking about the importance of his DBs being able to get off blocks, because in today's NFL, most teams looking for cornerbacks who are just good in coverage. Who gives a hell about how good they are tackling? Hell, most cornerbacks aren't really all that willing to be willing tacklers at time. And for Brian Flores defensively, you know that you're going to have a really physical defense. And some players I'm really excited to see in this defense is second-year safety Lewis Seen, who barely played in his rookie season. He only played in a handful of games. I believe he went down like week 4 of the season and he was out for the rest of the year. This dude coming out of Georgia was a headhunter, man. This is one of those safeties that if you're a slot receiver coming across the middle, you think twice every time you catch the football with this dude coming at you. He's also really good in man coverage. He has great athleticism. Now, he does have to get better with his tackling technique, because one thing that a lot of scouts pointed out, and I noticed this too watching him play, like this dude hits high. And when you hit high in the NFL, most of the times it ends up you getting put on your you-know-what. So I think Brian Flores is going to be able to get that cleaned up, and he's going to have Lewis Seen playing at a Pro Bowl level. What about second-year cornerback Andrew Booth out of Clemson? He also was a really physical player coming out of Clemson. This dude was somebody who was really good in man coverage, really good in press coverage as well. He's one of the more physical cornerbacks that were coming out of that draft. Him with Brian Flores is going to be a really good pairing. You also do still have one of the best safeties to ever play this game in Harrison Smith. Although he's getting up there in age, he's still a top 5 safety in the game. It just seems like Father Time just can't slow this brother down. You signed Byron Murphy in free agency. He's going to be your slot cornerback. I felt like he was pretty decent for the Arizona Cardinals. I won't say he was, anything crazy, but I think he was decent at times for Arizona. My problem with Byron Murphy is that he's fairly inconsistent. So can Brian Flores get more consistency out of Byron Murphy? And then you got rookie cornerback Mekhi Blackman, who could be a gem for Minnesota under Brian Flores' system, because this dude is the definition of super aggressive, man. Like, if you watch this dude's film, this guy was super aggressive, super physical at times. You probably could say that he probably should have been called for pass interference on the majority of the reps that he had. So if he can get his technique and his fundamentals cleaned up, this dude is going to be an absolute steal for the Minnesota Vikings and Brian Flores in this defense. But you also have to wonder, where's the pass rush coming from? You still have Danielle Hunter. You signed Marcus Davenport and free agency. You don't really know what you're going to get out of him. He's one of the biggest boomer bust players in the NFL. You don't know if this guy's going to give you 10 sacks or 2 sacks. But I think Brian Flores is going to be able to get the most out of this defense. And this defense most definitely should be tremendously improved compared to what it was last season with that conservative defense that they were running. Like, anytime you're getting cooked by Daniel Jones, dog, like, you got to find a way to move on. You got to find a way to improve the defense, man. And I'm not trying to slander Daniel Jones, but I mean, like, you just don't really expect for Daniel Jones just to dot you up like the way he was doing Minnesota in the wild card round. But overall, with the addition of Brian Flores, this defense should go from being near the bottom of the league like it was last season to at least being 13th or 12th in the NFL. Now, potentially, this could be a top 10 defense depending on if everything goes right. But my realistic expectations for this defense is for it to be a top 12, top 13 unit. They're probably going to be like top 16 in points per game allowed. I don't think they're going to allow a lot of yards. You're definitely going to be really good inside the red zone. You should be really good at getting off the field on third down. With the fact that Brian Flores just throws so many different blitz packages at you, he gives you so many different looks. Now, the only downfall of Brian Flores' defense that a lot of people point out is that you're asking a lot out of your defensive backs to be able to play a lot of man coverage, because anytime you're sending a lot of these blitzes, oftentimes you're going to be put in cover 1, cover 0 situations where you may not have too much help over the middle of the field. And when you look at this NFC North division with the Detroit Lions, them boys with Jared Goff, they can throw that thing. With Ben Johnson and all of the explosiveness and talent that they have on that offense, I'm definitely going to be interested in seeing how Brian Flores ends up being able to find a way to outcoach Ben Johnson, because Ben Johnson is doing that thing up there in the Motor City. And the Motor City right now has a lot of momentum. Based on what that offense did last year, Jared Goff was one of the hottest QBs at the end of last season. So for Minnesota, the downfall of this defense is that you don't really know how good your cornerbacks are going to be in certain situations when you're going against some of the better quarterbacks in the league. But for the most part, Brian Flores, this is somebody who has a proven track record dating back from his time being on New England's coaching staff, his long years at DC. They had a fantastic defense. Their defense improved tremendously the year that he was calling the plays. The Dolphins' defense always was elite under Brian Flores to the lich. So Brian Flores, I think he's going to be a fantastic addition for the Minnesota Vikings.